Hey everybody, welcome. I know that folks are still trickling in. A big welcome to everyone for our May conversation, our town hall, if you will. Welcome to those from all across the country who are joining us. If you are somehow super unfamiliar with Do the Work, I'm just going to take a beat to introduce Do the Work, tell you a little bit about what we do. We are an organization that's based all across the country. With representation from the entire queer community in aims to better queer representation and queer life in marketing and advertising. That takes on many forms. As we all know, marketing and advertising is such a multi-pronged industry now and touches practically every part of our lives and every waking moment because of these things right here. And so we are super excited to be having this conversation. This is a specific conversation that we've been trying to have I think for almost a year and a half now around bisexual representation and the realities of bisexual representation. And it's super exciting to be able to finally dive into this with our esteemed panelists. I want to first take a beat to thank everyone who made this panel happen. It's incredibly challenging to make something like this come together, to find such unbelievable panelists who are experts in this space and can speak not only through the lens of their own experience, but also through their work life. And so huge thank you to everyone who made this happen. My name is Arya Davachi. I am the programming director here at Do the Work. I'm coming to you live from Southern California. My pronouns are he, him. I identify more and more as a queer man these days, less of a gay man. I'm sure we can have a conversation about that at some point. My day job is I am the experiential lead at the Spring Hill Company, which is an athlete storytelling organization that was founded by LeBron James. And I lead all of our experiential creations, if you will, over all of our business units and then our white label partnerships with brands as well. The goal of my work at Do the Work is to really create this space where we can have these conversations as a community and to really come together in the hopes of not only facilitating change, but also really creating a space where we as queer people can challenge each other and to really push each other to create as much of a impact for our community as possible. So with that in mind, I want to take the opportunity to let each of our panelists introduce themselves. They'll tell you where they're from. They'll tell you what they do for work. They'll tell you how they identify. Rachel, I'm going to come to you first with your absolutely stunning room that you are in. I will spend a lot of today just mentally astral projecting there. Tell the folks a bit about yourself, please.
Thanks, Arya, and nice to see everybody. I'm Rachel Lowenstein. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Global Head of Inclusive Innovation at Mindshare, which is a media agency within WPP. I also am a content creator and a consultant, and I focus on neurodiversity, neurodivergent experiences, and being an autistic professional. I'm a bi woman and very excited to talk today about my experiences with the intersections of being bi, being disabled, being a woman, and all of the above. So I'll pass it maybe over to Paul.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Paul LaFleur, a design director at Hook, which is a creative production agency. I am a gay male, he, him pronouns, and in the day-to-day, working with clients like Google, YouTube, Stripe, Amazon, trying to instill kind of the things we're talking about with representation and making authentic storytelling happen, and bringing that, visibility to our industry. And with that, I will hand it off to Trace.
Trace, you are muted.
That seems to be how most calls open for me. With Trace, you are muted. So here we go, unmuting myself. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'm the CEO of Stocksy, and for those not familiar with Stocksy, we're a visual media stock agency, and we actually specialize in authentic and progressive imagery. We are a cooperative, which makes us a very different kind of company. I'm the new CEO and joined a few months ago, and this was one of the key reasons that I joined, is that we are artist owned. We're an artist network that includes about 1,800 creatives that contribute to our collection, but really at our core, we're all about elevating stock media. So we'll get into this a bit later, but we are very much about going beyond the tropes. We're also well known for the fact that we pay our artists 50 to 75% royalties, which is very distinct from anywhere else in the community. And I'm also proud to say that we're a chosen family member of Do the Work. In terms of identity, I identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. I notice I really don't use the term bisexual to identify myself, which is of course key to this conversation. When I lived with my wife, I openly identified as a lesbian. I never loved the term. Actually, I more openly identified as gay. And I noticed that in my current relationship with a man, I generally don't refer much to the term bisexual. So that's kind of interesting. I think in part just being at a point where we all know no label can express the perfectly beautiful complexity that makes us each and all human beings. But I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation and cover what any of those hesitancies might be and kind of explore more around the labels, and also just proud to be part of a company and the CEO of a company that truly takes this focus on representation to heart.
Amazing. Welcome to everyone. Super excited you're all here. I think, Trace, actually a really great jumping off point coming off of a bit of what you were talking about is sort of the realities that research suggests that bisexual people often feel erased or overlooked in media representations. I know also as someone who is at the intersection of queerness and Middle Eastern lifestyle, I'm like, I don't get a lot of representation either. And there is a lot of talk around the mental impact and sort of the unforeseen impact of this lack of representation. Rachel, I want to come to you first on this. Can you talk a bit about just personally, as much as you feel comfortable, how this lack of representation has maybe made a mental effect on you?
Yeah, I mean, candidly, being bi or queer is one of the kind of aspects of my identity that I don't really talk about that openly. I'm not closeted, I'm not ashamed of it. It's not something that I have a hard time discussing, but it's also just something that, because of the historical ways that bi women in particular have been so hypersexualized in media, that especially in a professional context, it's not something that I like openly offer up or discuss. So I think it's, especially as a younger person in my teens and 20s, it had a lot of impact on my self-esteem, where it was something that I just didn't want to share with the world or talk about. Especially being in a relationship with a straight man, that also added like a whole layer of complexities that was super fun to work through mentally. I think very happily with social media and other community spaces, being able to connect with other bi and or queer or pan women, it's helped, I think, destigmatize the shame and the kind of hypersexualization that happens in media, especially and specifically to bi women. But I think today we're starting to see that narrative change, although it's still something that weirdly, it's the aspect of my identity that I talk the least about compared to my disability or my gender.
I think we'll dive more into that. I think that's a really the hierarchy of identities that we utilize in conversation is something we'll talk about a bit more. Paul, I want to come to you on this as well. And I would love maybe, since you identify more as a gay man, maybe to talk through how you feel like the lack of existing representation plays into your creative workload and how maybe that impacts the way that you approach your work.
Yeah, for sure. And it was interesting, Rachel used a reference or a phrase of historical kind of history of how portrayals are happening. And there are these questions that I've seen be asked, what happens when there are no historical images that represent your identity? Or how do others learn to see you without that historical reference? How do you even learn to represent yourself? So those are kind of, questions or things that you have to ask yourself in earnest as you're approaching such delicate topics as, being authentically narrative driven creative. But being able to not just say, oh, look, we presented this figure of a person or this, character of a person, but to do so in a truthful way, and to do so in a way that's not just, I call it not just present, but positive kind of effect it has, is not just saying, look, a member of the LGBTQ plus community, a bisexual individual, and like checking that box, but what's the positive purpose that they're in this narrative for. It's not just to say we've done it representatively, but to do it in a purposeful manner. So those things are always going on throughout my mind when I'm thinking about how we're telling stories for clients, or when in the a subject matter is brought up about, well, what if we just did this? It's like, we could absolutely do that, and what are we getting credit for? Just to check that box off, to show someone else, or are we doing it for a purposeful reason? So those are kind of the things that are just always running through my mind when looking over briefs, as we're approached by clients, and they're trying to get their narratives told in a meaningful way.
I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to let Trace jump in on this as well. I'm so intrigued, as also like a C-suite senior executive, how this plays out for you, Trace, in terms of the impact of potentially being unrepresented.
Can you I just wanted to be sure, are you talking about sorry, were you talking about in the I sometimes stutter, by the way, speaking of, so just give me a moment here. Were you asking the question specifically about in the context of Stocksy?
I think in terms of, maybe we could take one step larger out just in general. But if you can speak to specifically at Stocksy as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think one of the, I will just drill it into Stocksy for a moment. And I think that one of the sort of, I think as a cooperative, as a company that honestly does things very differently from how we do things in corporate America, the intent of a cooperative is that we are a collective, we have collective ownership and collective commitment to all of our stakeholders, both employees and our broader contributor network. And that's kind of fiscally, emotionally, from a representation perspective. So it becomes, front and center to us that we're doing a really, really phenomenal job of representing all communities in the way that they are best presented. I guess if I go into sort of some more specific, to say that we're very focused on lived experience, and authentic representation at Stocksy. We're not going to find abs and flags, like, okay, maybe some, but we're really not about tropes. And I'll get into it a bit more, but we're looking at ways that we can focus on much behind the camera as we are in front of the camera, and kind of essentially even a particular project now that we've been fortunate to do together with Do the Work is around building a collection where that is not only for the community, that is not only of the community, but taken by LGBTQ plus photographers as well. So lived experience becomes key. It's something that we focus on across the board. Diversity is one of our top 3 initiatives at the company, like as one of our key OKRs, and where we will be focusing very, very intentionally. Sounds like a lot of buzzwords, other than to say we're just, I truly feel very fortunate to be working with a company that walks the walk.
Abs and flags is something I'm going to come back to. I want that on a hat, which is like a big X through it. But Paul, I want to come back to what you were saying, because I think as someone who is working directly on client briefs, as someone who is tackling this sort of head on, I imagine there are a lot of common misconceptions that you have to sort of like sift through. And obviously we're not going to like utilize this platform to call out clients specifically, but I would love to hear about like what some of these common misconceptions about marketing for queer people and bi people in specific are, and then how you address them effectively, and how you and your team can go back to a client to sort of try to, for lack of better word, course correct.
Sure. I think there's kind of this macro takeaway in the misconceptions, which is just to fall onto stereotypes. Because that abs and flags, I think, could fall into there too. It's just like, what do you expect to see? And with advertising, and this is not an excuse because it's a poor one to lean on, is advertising, we have X amount of time to get a message across and let that viewer immediately know what you're looking at or reading or absorbing. So I think a lot of advertisers will fall onto the sort of, well, we have no time, so show the easiest thing. It's two male presenting individuals together, two female presenting, or a male and female presenting. So the viewer thinks gay, lesbian, straight. But at the same time, all six of those people could have been bisexual. It's just the lowest hanging fruit on those things. For bisexual, I think, because there's more, potentially more complexity in this, they're in the spectrum of a huge area of how they represent themselves. I think a lot of times advertisers will just shy away from that immediately, like too difficult. It's more being in the middle and more of an end situation than it's a this or that situation. There was a professor, a doctor, Dr. Nora Madison, who is bisexual herself, and she kind of goes into the fact that bisexuality is so infrequently represented in media, just because of how inaccurate these stereotypes are. So in fear of doing it wrong, they just don't do it at all. But a lot of the misconceptions is this: bisexuals are this or this. They can't be anything else. It's just this very one way or the other, which often portrays them as disingenuous. It portrays them in a manner of being torn between two lovers. It's a male or a female. It can be we've seen narratives of the bisexual is on the path from straight to gay. It's this or that, and it's just a lot of nonsense. But it leads to this misrepresentation, and there is even this, in an effort to do good in advertising, you can still misstep based on misrepresentation. It's that whole point I made about positive, not just present. There was a study done, and forgive me for not remembering who did the study, but it was two ad campaigns on PrEP and HIV prevention medication, one that was based in New York City and one that was based in Chicago. And they showed these ads to a select group of surveyors, and the overall sentiment was that Black and bisexual males who were represented in the ads came across as highly promiscuous and duplicitous in these ads because they were represented, but it made them seem like this was a drug for them because of their behaviors and their lifestyles, and it was a gay drug and all this stuff. So even though it was representative visually of who it was, it wasn't done with so much thought and complete narrative through the campaigns, and actually like an adverse effect. So just that whole means of being about positive intention versus just having an underrepresented group be present. And there was a study by Kantar that had the exact same results, that showed if you showed underrepresented minority groups, you got a +1 tick in metric uplift of short-term sales, but an overall long-term -1 metric in brand power and equity, because it was just seen as like, check the box, here they are. Conversely, for the better, if you show those underrepresented groups in a positive manner with purpose in your ads, the short-term sales growth was a +23 metric, and the long-term brand power and equity was a +45 metric. Light years different. So it really is just being authentically true with who you're using, who you're showcasing, the stories you're actually trying to tell with that. And I know Trace mentioned this earlier too, but utilizing talent, in this case, obviously bisexual talent, telling their stories, not just in front of the camera or in a photo and on video, but behind the camera, hiring bisexual talent from start to finish, casting them in front of the camera, having them be your directors, having them be your writers, partnering with vendors and partners that are LGBTQ plus focused or skewed or have that niche in their marketing experience, but also making them just make sure they're key decision players throughout the whole thing. Just don't have the group you're representing at the end be like a co-signed checkoff at the end and saying, yeah, it looks good, or here's 2 flags that we'll look out for. It's more disingenuous that way. So they're all nothing too surprising with that, but it's amazing that we have to keep saying this repeatedly to let it stick in someone's head. And with bisexual representation, I'm looking for, I think we have so much catching up to do with bisexual representation that I'm kind of looking for like that big go big or go home moment. with a brand to do something meaningful with bisexuality. There was a comment in a piece around this topic by a freelance creative director. Her name is Kendra Meyer, and she said about this subject that she wishes a brand like Brawny did something amazing. Just said, Brody Man comes out as the bi king that we know he is, and like have a brand do something as simple and yet effective and long-standing as that. You know, putting a label on something that defines a brand, and how simple that could be. And the brand like Brawny has done that with different genders and expressions on their packaging, but something as big as that versus just showing a bisexual couple or bisexual individual in advertising, to have like that flag in the ground moment, I think is needed quickly to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and I think I want to just pull that over to Trace, because I think that's part of the goal of Stocksy, is to sort of create the opportunities for that authentic representation. And I would love, Trace, we've talked a lot about what is being offered by Stocksy, but I would love to hear like how you feel like your company's working with marketers and advertisers and other folks to really challenge the stereotypes. Paul sort of really brought a few of those to the forefront. Of course, sort of like being bisexual is a phase, the promiscuity that some people attach to bisexuals. But I'm wondering how you all work with the marketers and advertisers to create a more authentic representation.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Paul spoke to it, right? Even brands that want to include a bisexual couple or a bisexual individual, the question is, there's no outward sign of a bisexual, right? The same as there isn't. So there's no actual way. So I think that the way that or other than, again, going back to tropes, right? Which is the sort of, I actually meant to do an image search prior to this call of what the general sort of image of what a bisexual is portrayed, and most likely something like, a person with both people. But I think one of the pieces that's been really meaningful and really improved the collection for the better at Stocksy is asking our artists to build trusting relationships with the talent that they are working with, and have open, honest conversations with them about how they identify and how they're comfortable being identified, and then really bringing it down to the metadata, putting an LGBTQ plus tag on the content, right? So that for people who have identified part of that community. And what that gets us out of, again, is the tropes, right? So the images of people playing sports, people, older people, younger people's families, extended families, right? But then ultimately that the most significant signifier actually becomes the metadata, less about the image and more about the inherent sort of identity, as opposed to something that is outward, which I think in many ways is the beauty and the value, is that we get to go kind of beyond the label, ironically, by leveraging the label.
That's very interesting. Rachel, I want to come to you a bit on this, kind of like play on words on the metadata and talking about sort of intersectionality that's bisexuality is sometimes unseen, and there's other unseen levels of identity that are potentially intersecting. And that makes it even harder to represent people appropriately. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can marketers incorporate more diverse experiences of bisexuality into their strategies?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's that phrase, if it's not intersectional, it's bullshit. I think that obviously rings very true in any scenario. And I think Paul said it very well. It goes down, and Trace as well, it goes down to the talent that you're hiring in front of and behind the camera. I can talk about it specifically through my experiences, specifically for the autistic community. And the reason why I want to hone in on that is because autistic folks are, I think it's 4 times more likely to identify as queer. And the similar number lends itself to the trans community as well. And there's a variety of reasons for why that is. One of which is, for autistic people, we fundamentally, don't see the social constructs, or don't care or don't understand about the social constructs that are thrust upon us from a very early age. And for me, growing up, it was always, not really understanding why we had to be straight or gay, and I was attracted to both men and women. So, that lends itself very clearly to my autistic experiences around social differences and being confused or frustrated by social hierarchies or social standards. So I think if marketers are thinking about representing diverse experiences within the broader LGBTQ community, but specifically for the bi community, there are, interestingly, and it may sound niche, but there are very clear intersections and connection points between a lot of disabled communities, but specifically the autistic community. If you've ever been in any autistic or even neurodivergent spaces, chances are the majority of those people in those spaces are probably queer and likely bi as well. So, whether it's hiring that talent, representing that talent, there's interesting intersections from those experiences that candidly are not represented really at all in media. One project that we launched last year, and Trace, I'm sorry, I'm going to mention one of your competitors with Getty Images. We created a campaign called #AutisticOutLoud. And Autistic Out Loud was a campaign that we created with one of our pro bono clients called Hiki. And Hiki is an app for autistic folks to connect to friendships, relationships, and community, because we oftentimes have a hard time connecting with other folks. And it was a big frustration of mine and other people who were working on the project with me that there are very few positive representations of autistic people in media. If you go onto any, like most visual-based platforms and you type in autism or autistic, you're going to see young white boys. You're not going to see any women. You won't see any people of color. You will not see any LGBTQ people. So we created a library of self-portraits of autistic creators. I was one of them, but we had about 7 others taking self-portraits of themselves. And many of those people were from the LGBTQ community, specifically bi and pan folks as well. And we really wanted to represent the diverse experiences, especially from the queer lens that candidly are erased in mass media for the autistic community. So a bit of a side tangent, a side quest here, but I think it's important and a good example of if you let the community represent themselves and you let them show their experiences, that's the best way that brands can lean into any community, but specifically for the bi community. And that's really what we did with Autistic Out Loud, was being able to show their disabled identity, their LGBTQ plus identity, their gender, their race and ethnicity, et cetera, by showing the full spectrum, pun intended, of my community. So that was a really project that we were very proud of. Brands can license those images and use those images. Google was actually a brand that pledged to use the images immediately. And I think it's a really good example of self-representation and why, especially for communities who are so misrepresented, like the bi community, or, in the broader context of the project I was talking about, the autistic community, it's really important to give the camera to them and say, show us how you would represent yourselves. And that's a really simple, easy way that brands can leverage and lean into representation.
Yeah, I love that. And Rachel, can I say no offense at all in terms of, I love hearing when the whole stock media community, especially a very stock brand, actually does take the sort of initiative to sort of elevate and go beyond that. And can also just add that hearing your lived experience firsthand and how you define your experience is it's so wonderful to hear your voice is what I would like to add. I think that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about our friend AI in terms of ads and flags. In that, I think that in all the ways that brands talk about using AI for efficacy and cost effectiveness and sort of, its kind of trajectory in terms of getting to a place where it can, in fact, authentically represent, the truth is that it is, I'm not saying it's not going to get there, but it is so far from that, right? And that especially when it comes to underrepresented communities, I actually just asked Ken on who heads up marketing on our team, just realizing just curious to see what a bisexual image would be on an AI engine, and it checks all the boxes in terms of young, diverse, beautiful flags everywhere. Everywhere you've got a flag as a pin or as a brooch or in your hair on the back wall. There's like gorgeous flags, colored hair, and you know, just sort of very, I mean, as tropey as you can get, right? And that's exactly it. Like AI has no way of being subtle. It's only about the overt. It's everything that we stand against. And it really is this. I've never wanted to be a brand that's anti-AI. That's not our point. There's a lot of high value in how these tools can support us. But in terms of representing underrepresented communities, no fucking way. And it's not there. And we've got to be really, really cautious. These are the exact kind of stereotypes that have gotten us in the hot water that we are, and that have created the kind of divisiveness and you know, situation that we're currently in. And so I think just to sort of name that, yeah, it would be awesome if one day AI was not that, but certainly not the case today. I'm super curious your experience in that as well, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to say Gen AI is one of those things. The mantra I live by is we still have to be the arbiters of taste. We can't just fall upon whatever it spits out and think, yeah, that's good enough. You know, one of the big things that we're doing at Hook too is just trying to figure out how we can use Gen AI appropriately within our client work that isn't a default. And it's, you know, these exact reasons, not just from a quality perspective, but a you know, narrative perspective. Or are we doing the right thing, or are we presenting the best that we can in these instances? So when you're trying to showcase the right message with the right talent and all those things aligning, it's, you know, like you said, it's nowhere near where it needs to be, or, you know, can be, which is fine for now. We'll keep on doing what we know how to do best. But I don't think right now I have any fear, hopefully, hopefully, that it's going to just take over and replace us in knowing what is right, especially with these delicate subjects. It can write, it can showcase, visualize all the things, but it's always going to be the lowest common denominator without any strategic thinking, process, creativity involved, or that lens and filter of lived experiences. I guess that's the one thing we have to hold on to as living, breathing humans with these shared experiences and lived experiences. That's the lens and filter we can put on it moving forward.
Yeah, and if I can just add, I think, you know, my perspective when I'm talking to brands about Gen AI and the intersection of creativity is it's absolutely bonkers to think we should be offshoring or offloading anything from a creative lens that we as humans have barely, if at all, figured out. And stereotypes and representation are still abysmal in media and still pervasive. So I think we're all saying the same thing, but just to double click, I think, you know, as you said, Paul, we still have to be the arbiters of taste. Machines are not going to suddenly fix the issues that we've had if the inputs obviously are still as poor as they are. We should be using creativity so we can be more, or sorry, we should be using AI so we can be more creative rather than offloading the creative outputs and hoping that representation will get better. I mean, look what happened with Levi's when they said that they were going to be using Gen AI to diversify their models, when instead they could just hire diverse models, right? These are very simple solutions that we're creating complex solutions for instead.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I carry in my work all the time is like tech is a tactic, but tech can't be your solution. Like AI can't be your solution. It's impossible. I do want to, and this is something that I bring into every do the work conversation I have, which is around sort of pointing the microscope back at us, looking back at the community. And I'm unafraid to say that I have, in my past, when I was younger and dumber, been a proprietor of bisexual erasure. And that is a prevalent issue in the queer community. I think that it is maybe it's the placement in the acronym, I don't know. But there is a bit of like bisexual erasure and like forgetfulness of like we forget that community. And I really have to emphasize that we talk about Gen Z and now eventually Gen Alpha. 75% of queer Gen Z folks identify as bisexual. Like this is a big push. This is a huge next iteration of what our community looks like. And I do often worry that our generations have forgotten bisexual people or chosen to not put them front and center, which is probably playing into a lot of what we're discussing now. But I would love to hear from you all and how you feel like, you know, the community has played into this, how the community can do better. This is a queer platform, and we do want to empower queer people to be better. We are not perfect by any means. So I would love to come to you, Rachel, first to hear from you about how you feel like the community is playing into this and what they can do better. We can do better, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, if this was a conversation 5 years ago, I would have said, you know, I walk into a room with LGBTQ people and I'm not gay enough, and I walk into a room with straight people and I'm not straight enough, and you know, consistently feeling like I don't belong, or I'm not queer or gay enough in LGBTQ plus spaces. Candidly, I think it has become a lot more inclusive and safe in the last couple of years. Even as someone who used to frequent going to LGBTQ bars in my 20s, I'm not really a person who goes out very much anymore. But when I do, I actually feel like there's just this like tonal vibe shift in these spaces where I suddenly don't feel like the straight woman walking into a gay bar, and perhaps that's my own confidence in my bi identity. But I think there has been a lot of progress in the last couple of years to understand how hurtful and harmful bi erasure can be, and how these kind of exclusionary narratives of, oh, you're not really bi, you're just confused, or whatever, you know, the talk track is. But in general, I would say for people who aren't there yet, everyone's identities are so individual, and you can be talking to somebody and not know their experience, not know their identity, not know any of their background. And none of that should change or inform giving common decency or respect to somebody, which I think it just goes without saying.
I mean, we hope so, that goes without saying.
It goes without saying, but I think certain
It's
people
worth being said.
need to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. Trace, I want to come to you on this same question of how the community plays into this and your thoughts on that.
Sorry, I was thinking more about the next generation. Are you
Sure.
kind of, were you?
We can talk about them, yeah.
But I want to answer your question.
My question is more, I think, targeting the generations represented here, and how we've played into it and how we've sort of created the erasure, the hierarchies, the things of that nature. I think it does unfortunately go back to abs and flags, but sort of wondering how you feel like we played into it, and maybe, yeah, absolutely go talk about the future and the next generation, how you think it's shifting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing that causes, like, you know, what causes homophobia or anything, like, you know, in terms of there becomes this over identification with who you are and what is and what isn't, right? And I think both Paul and Rachel have kind of referred to the sort of, you know, the sort of tropes around bisexuality, that it's a phase, that if you're in a cisgender relationship, then you can't claim it, right? You don't ever belong. I totally identify with what Rachel was saying around, like, bisexual was such an uncomfortable term to take on because it had this kind of hypersexual, like, yeah, I'm in a relationship with two people when I'm entirely monogamous, and or kind of more of a loyalist, so to speak, and, you know, all of the sort of, and so then you have one, you know, the sort of, you know, classic kind of, you know, maybe, you know, say lesbian community would be like, well, you're not part of this community. So it kind of, you know, creates these you know, marginalized communities within marginalized communities. I do think I feel very positive around what is Gen Z and what is Gen Alpha, and the fact that I feel very buoyed by their unwillingness to take on identity in the way that our generations have created. I'd love to think that in part we've you know, we've kind of paved the way, and I just think they're unique spirits in themselves that have also just kind of opened a whole lot of doors that we didn't dare open for ourselves. And sure, it's definitely a paving of the way. I admittedly will just be totally honest and say that actually when I got the invitation to be on this panel, like I took a minute. I was like, you know, it's not a label that I typically, you know, out in the world ascribe to myself. And I'm very much, again, this idea of kind of buoyed by the fact that this is it is so quickly becoming not only a normative conversation, but again, this sort of conversation that needs to be told cross-generationally. I was very inspired and had an amazing experience working with Rob Smith, who's an incredible community activist and founder of the Fluid Project, which started off as a kind of non-binary clothing brand and really has extended into Get Fluid, which does broader training across corporate. And you know, the whole notion of fluid and how it attracted that younger community and the social activism that lives on the heels of that is just, I feel like just an amazing and like huge opening for all of us in terms of stepping into like who we truly are, like at a heart and soul level. So I feel positive about it.
I'm glad to hear that. And also thank you for joining the panel. I do think that there's always a bit of that has to happen when you decide to step into a space like this, particularly at a C-suite level. And I think that there is a lot of incredible strength that takes. And so if no one else has told you today, I'm proud of you for doing it.
I'll take them.
Yeah. Paul, I want to come to you on this as well. How do you feel like the community is playing in?
I distinctly recall kind of the first time it really was brought to my attention, which is sad to say because it's a few years ago, but still feels too recent to be like the first time to really acknowledge this, which is a ridiculous case study in the B in LGBTQ plus being replaced with the Babadook and having the Babadook be suddenly a gay icon. And seeing the community being a viral meme and all this stuff, I was ecstatic because I'm a horror movie fan and was a fan of the movie and all that. And I was like, this is so fun. And playing into that, and then seeing kind of like the bisexual community being like, great, more erasure. And kind of thinking, oh, shit, that was lighthearted, but then kept getting taken further and further, and seeing people in their own community retaliate against bisexual individuals who are like, okay, but not so great. And I was like, well, what are we doing? Or when does a joke go too far and like actually do damage to ourselves? So, you know, kind of one of those moments where it was a bit like get your head out of your rear and, you know, do something and try to be a better ally for your own community members. Kind of the whole see something, say something. If you see nothing being done, then say everything. So, you know, similar to Trace, I was like, well, I'm a cisgendered white male who happens to be gay. What am I bringing to a bisexual conversation other than, you know, the industry that I'm a part of, and just being as best of an ally I can for others in the community, I think is, you know, hopefully goes without saying, as Rachel mentioned, but, you know, saying everything in the most opportune moments to better others, I think is just the simplest thing you can do.
I think that's very well said. The Babadook shows up again. There that thing is. I'm getting some questions in the Q&A, so I'm gonna save my questions and answer some of these questions, or ask you all these questions, I should say. And this is something I think about often. I work in an RFP-based business as well. If marketers and brands don't want to start to bring up conversations and discussions of bisexual representation with us, how do we bring it up with them? Rachel, I want to come to you. I feel like you probably have to do this often where you bring up inclusion and in your work, and I would love to hear from you, like, how do you broach having these conversations and how do you sort of come to the table prepared to be like, let's talk about this?
Yeah, so in my role where I lead inclusive innovation globally for a major media agency, my real core focus is on helping marketers become more culturally fluent, because I would argue that the biggest flops in our industry in the last few years is because we had marketers who maybe didn't understand what was happening in culture, and weren't attuned to just broader cultural intelligence. So one thing that I always advise is it comes down to really good strategy. I was working with a brand who, without giving anything away, they had a kind of a strategic focus. Their strategy was about duality and twos. They had this whole thing about two, you can be both, you can be two. And that was a really clear insight for us. Like, hey, there could be something really interesting here with the LGBTQ plus community, specifically with the bi community. I think anytime you're approaching a brand to do something that may pose risks for them, whether that's financial risks, reputational risks, whatever, if it has a clear hook into their strategy, their mission, or something that they're trying to achieve, if you can ladder that up easily into their existing strategy and challenge them in a way that is culturally sensitive and fluent, I think it becomes a very easy conversation. I also think that as you're working with brands and you're working with leaders, if there's a clear there's somebody missing from this conversation, or somebody missing from these ads, or somebody missing from this production crew, whatever it is, we're all in roles where we can actively say, we need this community represented for this specific reason, or just because it's the right thing for us to do, to have diverse perspectives, to make sure that we are being effective with our marketing, right? If marketing in and of itself, if it's not effective, it's not good marketing. So those are my two paths. One, does it ladder up into the strategy? Usually, if you are a creative strategist, you can find a way to ladder up a creative idea into a strategy with a brand. And then two, challenging if you're seeing a very monolithic representation of people working on a project who might be able to bring different perspectives. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you're still finding your place, there's always allies and leaders who you can tap into. I like to think that if I'm working on a project and someone more junior might have an idea, always being the person who people feel safe to come to challenge when something doesn't feel right or feels exclusionary.
That's great. Thank you. Paul or Trace, do you have anything to add to that question? I've got another one to throw your way.
Just a quick add on to that, because I completely align with everything Rachel just mentioned. There are employee resource groups and things like that at companies that, if they're not set up, start setting them up. At Hook, we have a diversity equity council that is just for these exact things. Many times that will approach clients in a very open, respectful, partnership, collaborative way when these things arise. But that type of group is there too, to raise these concerns, so that there's this internal organization within our agency that can help guide you if you don't know, how to, breach these topics with clients. And if an agency that has 100-ish people in it can do it, I don't think it's an excuse for other organizations that have larger employee headcounts to do the same thing. So start from within and growing that community within your own agency to let there be a comfort in that approachability, I think is great.
The next question that's coming in through the chat is, what's the best way for creative teams to explore bisexual visual creative beyond the tropes, if something visual is important to the story? Trace and Paul, I'm going to come to both of you on this. I think, Trace, part of your work is solving this problem of, creating new visual representations of bisexuality. But I'm wondering, how much of that process do you all rely on the creators to take part in? Can you talk a bit about that actual creative process that goes on at Stocksy to create the representation? And then Paul, of course, I'll come to you as someone who just works in design and in the creative space as to how you create more effective, less tropey representations of bisexual people.
Yeah, I think it's covered a little bit in my sort of expression of that identity becomes in how the individual is comfortable identifying. And then similarly, we also have to do the work to support artists and creators who oftentimes, let's also talk about diversity, right? Don't have the like stock media itself is an interesting category, right? It takes money, it takes dollars to be able to say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a shoot of this particular community. So for example, recently we had a grantee available to us, and we gave a grant to I think it was up to 8 LGBTQ plus artists to create content that using models who identify from the community. So I think part of it is around creating the opportunity in the spaces, also being aware that it is kind of a privilege to be able to do that, and it's not always easily accessible to all of us. So the one piece that we do focus in on is empowering our artists with what they, with the support to go ahead and do that. And then in terms of the other piece I covered off on, some of it becomes, and like there's actually a lot of power in looking at a photo that you might assume was a straight jock, let's just say, and with a tag, bisexual or LGBTQ. I know that those are sort of tropey in even how I'm describing them, but I think that there is power in breaking the identity with the identifier.
That's well said, Paul. I want to come to you sort of on the same topic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, to piggyback a little bit, to the question, how do you visualize it? To kind of put that question back is, well, how do you visualize something that's just not one thing? So to like Trace's point, showing it in just respectful manners and respectful representation is the way you can show it. Don't pretend like you have all the answers either. I'm not a bisexual male, so I wouldn't know how to authentically maybe do that completely. But I would, want to lean on those who are. And Trace mentioned this as well, which is many times we find the best creative happens when you give guardrails to creators or those you're hiring, but then to help fill in the gaps. Obviously, we want to stay on brand, on message, all this stuff, hit the strategy, as Rachel was saying previously, but allowing those individuals to be authentically themselves is key to coming to the table with the best creative and the best solutions for a brief. It's not pretending like exactly what that visual actually might come out to be.
That's very well said. Thank you. I think that's really interesting. Actually, I'm gonna think on that for a little, like having the opportunity to actually create the visual and not the mood board's kind of blank and being like, well, we will find out when we go because we're gonna do this the right way. With that sort of mentality in mind, I think we are coming up on time, and I want to give everybody an opportunity to tell folks where they can find you, connect with you, talk more with you. Trace, I want to come to you first. Can you tell the folks what's the best way to get into contact with you and to work with Stocksy?
Well, you can reach me, Trace at Stocksy, TRACE, and it's very important to me that that if someone wants to reach me, I am reachable. And in terms of working with Stocksy, go to our website at stocksy.com. There are ways to work with us both on the Stocksy team, but then also as a contributor. I think it's really interesting to learn about what a career or a hustle as a stock media photographer looks like. It's actually a really cool industry, and taking it beyond the tropes and elevating it together with us is very much what we're looking to do in the world. So come check us out.
Awesome. Thank you. Rachel, I want to come to you next. Where can the folks get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, so on Instagram and TikTok, I'm Rachel Eson. That's just RachelIssan as in Nancy. And then LinkedIn, I'm just Rachel Lowenstein. Those are usually the best places to get in contact with me.
Awesome. Thank you. Paul, where can folks connect with you?
Controversial but brave. I'm not on social media besides LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn or email paul.lafleur@byhook. That's BY, not BI. Interestingly enough, byhook.com, or just by Gmail at paullafleur@gmail.com.
Awesome, thank you. I want to encourage everyone also, I don't know where I am on your screens, but Do the Work is right next to me. Please follow Do the Work. Please get involved with Do the Work. If you're here, you like already kind of did the hardest part. You're already like very much in it with us. But I want to encourage you to tell more people about the work that we do, more people about this sort of panel open town hall that we have. I want to thank all three of you so much for taking this time and having this conversation. I have yet to see a conversation like this before today, hoping to see so many more. Thank you for all taking the time and having the bravery to really speak out and to be honest about how this impacts you personally, how it impacts your work. We are so thankful to Do the Work, and I'm so thankful to be able to share a space with you. So looking forward to the next one. Hopefully have you all back soon. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
y'all.
Thank you for hosting it so brilliantly and being such a good listener and kind of reflecting back on what you heard. You did it. It was wonderful to be part of the conversation in how you hosted it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Have a good one, y'all.
Y'all, bye.